has been brought to you by the letter D.
All right, everyone, so we're up to D in the ABCs of Archaeology, and D is for Dendrochronology in my book. Now, what's Dendrochronology? Commonly known as tree ring dating. I bet a lot of you have heard of that. Now, tree ring dating, at least as evidence shows, came from or first became known in ancient Greece, which means it's been around a long time. But it was formalized into sort of a modern practice in the very early 1900s by a guy named A.E. Douglas in the American Southwest. Now, this was a good place to pioneer this practice because the American Southwest is very dry, and as we know, very dry areas lend themselves to preservation. And if you know that area of the United States, they have a whole petrified forest there, so it really is a good place for this. Now, the concept is pretty simple, which is in a year, trees grow, and then during the winter they stop growing. And that halt is how a tree ring forms. So you can count the tree rings, and that will tell you how old a tree was when it usually was chopped down, when it stopped growing. So the basic concept is fairly simple. Now, of course, tree growth within a year is very much affected by climate and other events. So, for example, volcanoes. In 1883, Krakatoa exploded. That also happened recently in the past 10 years or something. But in 1883, there was a major eruption. And that caused devastation and disruption to the climate all over the world. In fact, I think you could see sort of like rings around the sun for a few years after that. I think they called that something like the Pope's rings. So this was a phenomenon seen all over the world, and it led to some bad winters. Actually, the same thing happened in the year 536. I don't know if the origin of the volcanic eruptions in that year is known, but that was a disaster year all over the world. You see that in written records from Asia to Europe. Of course, my area of a little bit better knowledge is the British Isles, and you see all kinds of mentions in that in the Irish Annals, etc. So that was a particularly bad year. And when that happens, of course, what you're going to see is narrow tree rings because the trees are not going to be able to grow. If the sun is blocked, you have terrible winters, etc. So events like that kind of give you an anchor. So if you find an old piece of wood, you can tell maybe that was the year of that known volcanic eruption. And then what do? You can look across trees in that region, hopefully of the same species, because that allows for better comparison. And that anchor year allows you to then have a good view of what came before and after. Now, of course, in modern times, when you know the exact date of when a tree was felled, that then gives you a very easy way to build a record of recent times. But of course, the trick is getting a long period of time and starting from a long time ago. The further you can go back, the better. But that's essentially how it works. Now, some great examples of exceptionally long tree ring records are the bristlecone pine in California. That goes back 8,500 years, and you might be aware of those trees. I think maybe they're the oldest living trees, or I think maybe they've been surpassed, but it's one of the oldest. And so that's known, and it's able also, again, it's a very dry environment. So not only do the trees live a long time, but the dead trees are preserved for a very long time. And nowadays, they've developed ways to take cores out of trees, living trees, without really harming them. Because, of course, with microscopic technology and precision tooling, they can do that. So they can take it from very old living trees. That also helps a lot. But you remember one of the paradoxes of preservation is that it happens really well in dry environments and waterlogged environments like bogs, swamps. We talked about those bog bodies. So there is an older tree ring record than that, somewhere in Central Europe, that's 12,500 years old. So pretty amazing. Of course, there are some caveats and complications here. So think about the tropics, where you don't really have a winter. For that reason, there's not a great tree ring record. And generally speaking, a lot of the tropics, we know tropical rainforest, Those are neither waterlogged environments nor are they dry. They're wet, but it actually changes. It's just a lot of rain. And that's actually the worst for preservation. So that's why there are some places like Southeast Asia where you just don't find a lot of stuff. Now, another complication can occur because remember, what a tree ring date tells you is when the tree was felled, essentially. That's when the clock stops. Wood is not always used directly after the tree is felled, and sometimes wood is reused for long periods of time, and there are some examples of this. We did touch upon that when I discussed the Antikythera mechanism, where they have some conflicting data from different tree ring dates and carbon dates, etc. There, one of the hypotheses was that the planking used in that ship might have been hanging around quite a while or maybe reused from another ship. So that can throw things off a little bit. However, tree ring data is in many ways even superior to carbon dating, because remember, carbon dating does, or we actually haven't talked about it yet, so don't remember, but we will get to it. Preview is carbon dating, radiocarbon dating, does have a margin of error, so it usually doesn't give you an exact date, you get a range. And secondly, there is a sort of drift where that data becomes off, and there's different ways to calibrate it, so it's not exact. So tree ring dating, when you have a long enough record, is often a good check on carbon dating. But remember, carbon dating can go back really far, and there's other things that can go back even further that can date even inorganic material. We talked a little bit about that with the carpentry example in Zambia. Anyway, the point is, tree ring dating, dendrochronology is super accurate if it's done well, and it's a very good check on radiocarbon dating. Now, it can tell you some pretty specific stuff, actually. Think about like a village. You found some old village, and you see when a lot of trees were felled, and there's certain years that are boom years, you know then that something was going on there. There was a lot of people, the population of the village was healthy, maybe some new people moved in. And then you can say after that, there's like no trees felled in a whole bunch of years. That probably means something happened there. And remember, because it's not only how old the thing was, you get it tied to a specific year. So that then you can sort of test things around known dates. So for example, you can see in places that were devastated by a war, like the 30 Years' War in Central Europe, Germany, you might find during that you have like no trees felled in certain years. So it does help you to chart the course of, let's say, a specific location like a village. It can give you a lot of insight in that sense. It can also give you a sense of the effects of weather and climate on people, because remember, during some of those disaster years like 1883 and 536, you're probably going to have a period after that where there's not a lot of trees felled because people died of famine, or the trees themselves were not very healthy. So it can give you some information on the effects of the environment on people. Now, we talked a little bit about some of the weaknesses. One, it doesn't work very well in the tropics. Two, it's you really want to compare species to the same species, so you're doing apples to apples. And you also do need an extensive record of this built in an area for it to be very useful over long periods of time. The good news is this is an old practice. Like I said, it started in ancient Greece. That was the first node of this tree ring phenomenon, and it was used as a dating practice since the early 1900s. So there actually are good tree ring records built up in a lot of places, and they're improving all the time. So this is a sort of old-fashioned tool in the archaeologist toolkit, but still very much in use. So D is for dendrochronology. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.